In 17th century Paris, there was a woman whose name caused nobles to whisper in the shadows and even prompted the king himself to order the burning of records. She held no title. She was not nobility. Yet she entered and exited the bedrooms of France's most powerful people as if she belonged there. Catherine Montvoisin, or as history records her, La Voisin, needed no knife, no army. She only needed a vial of powder. The question arises, was La Voisin truly an evil witch, or simply a woman who knew how to sell what the nobility craved most? Power, love, and the death of their enemies. When speaking of Louis XIV's era, people often immediately think of the splendid Palace of Versailles, the radiance of the Sun King, and the pinnacle of art and culture. But behind those gold-plated walls lay a dark world full of horrifying secrets. In Louis XIV's court, adultery was not rare. It was almost part of the game of power. The king had famous mistresses and so did the nobles. But love here was not emotion. It was a weapon. Losing the king's favor meant losing power, losing status, losing everything. It was in that context that a hidden demand emerged among Paris's upper class, the need for solutions that no one dared speak of publicly. They wanted to poison husbands to inherit property. They wanted abortions to conceal extramarital affairs. They wanted love spells to win someone's heart. They wanted to know the future to prepare for political intrigues. And La Voisin appeared at the right time, in the right place, with exactly what they needed. Catherine de Chaise was born around 1640 in a poor family in Paris. From a young age, she was fascinated by fortune-telling and taught herself the art of palm reading, chiromancy, from the age of 9. Catherine had a special talent, the ability to cold read, the art of observing gestures and attitudes to make predictions that seemed miraculous. In her teenage years, Catherine married Antoine Montvoisin, a jeweler and silk merchant with a shop at Pont-Marie in Paris. Life was initially quite comfortable. They had at least 3 children, including their eldest daughter, Marguerite, born in 1658. But then Antoine's business failed, plunging the family into debt. Catherine refused to return to the poverty of her childhood. She decided to use her fortune-telling talent to earn a living, and she was very successful. Catherine took the nickname La Voisin, meaning the neighbor, a friendly, approachable name. At first, La Voisin was merely a fortune teller and midwife, but gradually, as her clientele grew and demands diversified, she expanded her services. She sold items claimed to have magical power. She provided aphrodisiacs. She performed magical rituals. And most importantly, she sold poisons. By the late 1660s, La Voisin had become a famous figure in Paris's high society. She lived at Villeneuve-sur-Gravois, where she met clients during the day and hosted lavish parties with music in the garden at night. Her clients included the most powerful names: the Countess of Soissons, the Duchess of Bouillon, and many other nobles. La Voisin had a professional network of associates. Adam Lesage performed magical tasks. The priest Etienne Guibourg and Abbé Mariotte presided over black masses, and there was a network of poison suppliers, notably the pharmacist Catherine Trianon. The art of poisoning at that time had become a true science, perfected largely thanks to Giulia Tofana, an Italian professional assassin, just a few decades before La Voisin. The poisons left no trace, making death appear as natural illness. Arsenic, nitric acid, mercuric chloride, all were in La Voisin's chemical arsenal. In 1675, a shocking case occurred. Marie-Madeleine de Brinvilliers, the Marquise de Brinvilliers, was tried for poisoning her father and 2 brothers to seize their inheritance. She had tested poisons on her own servants and on patients at the Hôtel Dieu hospital, where she volunteered to visit the sick. Before being beheaded, Brinvilliers said a sentence that chilled the entire court. Half the people of rank in society are involved in this sort of thing. If I spoke out, I could ruin them all. Was she exaggerating? Perhaps. But there was a terrifying truth in her words. The Brinvilliers case opened a vast investigation. In 1677, after arresting Magdalene de Lagrange on charges of forgery and murder, Paris police began uncovering a complex network of fortune tellers, alchemists, and poison sellers operating underground in the city. In January 1679, Marie Beauce, a famous fortune teller and poison seller, was arrested. Under interrogation, she named La Voisin. The domino effect began. On March 12, 1679, La Voisin was arrested right outside the church of Notre-Dame de Bonne Nouvelle after attending Mass just before her appointment with Catherine Trianon. When La Voisin was arrested, her servant, Margot, said a meaningful sentence. This arrest will be the end for many people in all classes of society. She was not wrong. In April 1679, Louis XIV established a special court to investigate the case. This court had a fearsome name, Chambre Ardente, the burning chamber, or the court of fire. The name came from the decoration of the courtroom. It was deep in the basement of the arsenal, the royal armory, lit only by torches, with windows covered in black cloth, creating a gloomy and terrifying atmosphere. 13 judges sat there to interrogate criminals. Gabriel Nicolas de la Reynie, Lieutenant General of Paris Police, was tasked by Louis XIV with directing the investigation. He was a careful, meticulous man, determined to get to the bottom of the truth. The scale of the case exceeded all imagination. 319 summonses were issued. 194 people were arrested. More than 400 people were investigated. 36 people were executed. Many others died in prison, committed suicide, or were exiled. The court was in panic because the list of suspects included not just the poor or merchants, but nobles, dukes, countesses, and even the king's close confidants. In the laboratories of the arrested alchemists, police found furnaces, tongs, magical minerals like sulfur and mercury, along with deadly poisons like arsenic, nitric acid, and mercuric chloride. La Reynie quickly realized that a poisoning epidemic was raging in Paris, with an enormous amount of effort devoted to buying, selling, and producing poisons. But La Voisin did not just sell poison. She sold solutions to desperately powerful people, and that is why she became so dangerous. La Voisin was imprisoned at Vincennes and subjected to many lengthy interrogations. According to court records, although torture was authorized, in reality she was not severely tortured. Gabriel Nicolas de la Reynie confirmed this. Madame de Sévigné, who observed La Voisin just before the execution, described that she could move freely and appeared healthy, not like someone who had been tortured. Why? Perhaps because the authorities knew La Voisin held too many dangerous secrets. If tortured excessively, she might die before confessing everything. Or worse, she might name names that no one wanted to hear. In the confessions, the most horrifying accusations began to emerge. Black masses, messe noire. According to the defendant's testimonies, these ceremonies were held in dark rooms. The priest Etienne Guibourg, a depraved cleric claiming to be the illegitimate son of Henri de Montmorency, presided over the rituals. In some cases, a naked woman lay on the altar as a living altar. 6 black candles were lit. The priest wore vestments embroidered with esoteric symbols in silver. The chalice and paten were placed on the naked woman's belly. And then, according to the testimonies, a newborn infant was brought in. A quick knife to the throat, the cry was silenced. Blood dripped into the chalice and flowed down the woman's body below. The infant's body was then thrown into the blazing furnace. Montague Summers recorded the invocation used in these ceremonies. Astaroth, Asmodeus, princes of friendship and love, I summon you to accept this sacrifice, this child that I offer to you, for the things I request. But this is the important point. All these descriptions come from testimonies, not from confirmed physical evidence. Some testimonies may have been given under pressure, under the influence of alcohol, or under coercion. In the book Sex with Kings, 2009, Eleanor Herman claims that police found the remains of 2,500 infants in La Voisin's garden. However, Anne Somerset in The Affair of the Poisons, 2003, refutes that there is no evidence in the records of La Voisin's garden being searched for human remains. Modern historians fiercely debate the authenticity of the Black Mass accusations. Some believe they are true. Some believe they were exaggerated or fabricated to create a larger scandal. The truth may lie somewhere between these extremes. What cannot be denied is La Voisin sold poisons. She performed magical rituals, and she had a network of clients in the nobility. Then a name appeared, a name that completely changed the direction of the investigation. Françoise Athénaïs de Rochechouart de Mortemar, the Marquise de Montespan. Madame de Montespan was not an ordinary mistress. She was Louis XIV's official mistress, the woman called the true Queen of France, due to her influence at court. From the late 1660s to the late 1670s, she was the most powerful woman at Versailles, bearing the king's 7 legitimized children. According to the arrested defendants' testimonies, Montespan had contacted La Voisin as early as 1665, before even becoming the king's mistress. In 1666 or 1667, Montespan allegedly participated in a black mass at a house on Rue de la Tannerie in Paris. The purpose? To win Louis XIV's love. And it worked, at least chronologically. In July 1667, Madame de Montespan became the king's new mistress, replacing Louise de la Vallière. In 1673, when the king's interest in Montespan seemed to wane, she once again turned to La Voisin. This time, the priest Étienne Guibourg was hired to perform a series of black masses, and in at least one ceremony, Montespan herself lay naked on the altar as the living altar. La Voisin also supplied Montespan with aphrodisiacs, which Montespan secretly added to the king's food and drink when he dined in her rooms. Strangely, the king had a mysterious daily headache, and this headache suddenly disappeared after he stopped dining in Montespan's rooms. In 1677, when the king began to infatuate with Madame de Soubise, Montespan again used aphrodisiacs provided by La Voisin's colleague, Françoise Filastre. Then in 1679, the worst happened. The king began a relationship with Angélique de Fontanges, a young, beautiful woman at the peak of her youth. Montespan fell into despair. According to records, she summoned La Voisin and requested the unthinkable, to kill both the king and Fontanges. La Voisin initially hesitated, but eventually agreed. At Catherine Trianon's house, La Voisin and her accomplices planned to poison the king by tainting a petition to be handed directly to him. On March 5, 1679, La Voisin went to the palace to submit the petition, but that day there were too many petitioners. The king received none. The assassination plan failed. 7 days later, La Voisin was arrested. Part 7. The woman who knew too much. During her imprisonment at Voisin, La Voisin was interrogated many times. She denied ever meeting or serving Montespan. She admitted that Paris is full of this sort of thing, and countless people are involved in this sinful trade, but refused to name specific clients. However, once, she said to a guard a meaningful sentence, "The question I fear most is that they will ask about my visits to the court." La Voisin knew too much, and that was both her power and her curse. According to some sources, La Voisin once said, "If I told everything, the entire court would collapse." On February 22, 1680, La Voisin was publicly executed at Place de Grève in Paris before thousands of spectators. She was burned at the stake, burned alive. On the way to the execution site, she pushed the priest away. When tied to the stake, she desperately tried to push away the straw being piled around her. She had no final confession. She did not beg for forgiveness. She died in silence. But La Voisin's death was not the end. After La Voisin's death, her daughter, Marguerite Montvoisin, began to reveal everything. In July 1680, Marguerite disclosed the connection between her mother and Madame de Montespan. Marguerite's testimonies were corroborated by those of other defendants. The Chambre Ardente began a deeper investigation into Montespan. The testimonies became increasingly serious. Both priest Guibourg and Françoise Filastre confirmed that Montespan had used their services. The plot to assassinate the king was exposed. But then something strange happened. Louis XIV ordered a ban on public trials of any cases involving Montespan. All testimonies related to her were sealed and kept secret, separated from the official records. Finally, in April 1682, after more than 3 years of operation, with 210 trials, the Chambre Ardente was dissolved. Louis XIV ordered, close all records, seal all testimonies involving prominent people, forbid mentioning the case again, imprison the remaining people by lettre de cachet, royal arrest warrant, without public trial. Why? Not because the crimes had ended, but because too many dangerous names were involved. Gabriel Nicolas de la Reynie, who had spent 3 years investigating the case, said a meaningful sentence. The enormity of their crimes is precisely their protection. The guiltiest were the most powerful, and they could not be executed without causing a scandal that would shock the nation. Montespan was never tried. She gradually lost the king's favor but continued to live in luxury until 1691, when she voluntarily withdrew to the Field de Saint-Joseph-Convent in Paris. She spent the rest of her life in charity and penance, until her death in 1707 at age 66. Etienne Guibourg was sentenced to life imprisonment and died in prison in 1686. Hundreds of others, those who knew too much, were imprisoned in fortresses and forgotten. Some died in prison, some were exiled, some were released after many years, but on condition that they never mention the case. So who was La Voisin? Was she truly an evil witch who performed black masses and killed thousands? Or was she merely a shrewd businesswoman who understood market demands and provided services that no one dared sell publicly? Perhaps the answer lies somewhere between these extremes. La Voisin was not a witch in the traditional sense. She had no supernatural powers. She did not fly on a broom. She was an intelligent woman with knowledge of herbs, psychology, and the art of deception. She knew how to give people what they wanted, whether hope, love, or death. But she was also a real criminal. She sold poisons. She aided murders. She performed dark rituals, whether they truly worked or were merely psychological theater. The most terrifying thing about La Voisin was not what she did, but why she could do it. She existed because there was demand, and that demand came from the most powerful people in society, those willing to kill, sell their souls, do anything to retain power, love, or money. La Voisin did not create crime. She merely provided the tools for those who already had criminal intent. And that is the true lesson from the affair of the poisons. The most frightening people in this case were not the ones who mixed the poison, but those who drank it. The affair of the poisons is one of the largest criminal cases in French history. It exposed the dark side of Louis XIV's court, a world where power and desperation intertwined, where love and murderous intent were separated only by a vial of powder. But the long-term consequence of the case was not the number of executions or imprisonments. The real consequence was the silence. Louis XIV chose silence over justice. He chose to protect the court's reputation over punishing crime. And in that silence, how many truths were buried? La Voisin was burned alive at the stake, but the records of the most powerful names were burned with her. The most dangerous testimonies were sealed forever. The Chambre Ardente was dissolved not because it had completed its work, but because it had come too close to the truth. The affair of the poisons shows us a pattern repeated in history. Those who know too much are burned alive, to protect the power behind them. La Voisin may have died, but the questions remain. If La Voisin was burned to keep her silent, how many other truths were burned with her? And among those saved from trial, among the names sealed in secret records, how many were truly innocent? History never answers those questions, because sometimes the truth is too dangerous to be spoken. Even after 350 years, the affair of the poisons remains one of the greatest mysteries of the 17th century. The sealed records were not fully opened until the 19th century, and even when opened, many pages had been burned or disappeared. We can only guess what really happened in the shadows of Louis XIV's court and who truly drank from La Voisin's vial of powder.